Here in the fourth week of Ordinary Time, we're still at that beginning of Ordinary Time. And so we're reading from the beginnings of Christ's earthly mission. And here we hear the response of some of his early preaching. The people are surprised by the method that Jesus is using to teach the crowds. The gospel even notes that it is a clear departure from the way in which the scribes and the Pharisees would teach. The crowds are astonished. What is this? A new teaching with authority. The way that the traditions of their time would have dictated you should teach was that you would study for a time under a certain rabbi who himself was trained in a certain branch of Pharisaicalism, a certain branch of interpretation of the law. And then that rabbi had to be studied under another rabbi, etc., etc. And when the scribes and the Pharisees would teach, they usually wouldn't say, this is coming from me. They would say, Rabbi so-and-so, who I studied under, would say this. And then his rabbi would say that, etc., etc. So the gospel is noting that Jesus is doing something different here. Jesus is not just one of the other Pharisees, but there's a new teaching, and a new teaching with authority. In the Catholic tradition, we have the word called the deposit of faith. This refers to the public revelation of Jesus Christ that ends with the death of the last apostle. We call that the deposit of faith. Then we have the magisterium that helps us to explain and understand that deposit which has been handed on. I like to think of a grape. The grapes that make wines, they're the same grape, but when you plant them in different locations throughout the earth, they produce a different kind of flavor, and then that flavor produces a different kind of wine. But it's still a grape. In a similar way, we have the sacred deposit of faith. It's the same thing that has been handed on to us from Christ, and then planted in the various locations and times throughout the world. It is the magisterium that helps us to apply it to our particular time and place. It is clear that throughout salvation history that this is the way that God likes to work. Think about in the first reading today. We know that God can speak a voice from heaven. He does it several times, both in the Old Testament and even in the New Testament. So he could, if he wanted to, simply dictate everything he wanted to say as his booming voice from heaven. Occasionally he does so. But most of the time, he does what we see in the first reading today. He wants his word to be spread at the local level, using human beings, using us, making us participants in his plan of salvation. This is why he chose the prophets in the Old Testament. This is why he chose the apostles in the New Testament. He calls those to himself to be co-workers in his vineyard. I think this explains to us the importance of the church at the local level. In the structure of the church, we talk about two terms, subsidiarity and solidarity. Solidarity, of course, meaning the wholeness of the faith throughout the whole world, the 1 billion Catholics together. And then subsidiarity is a principle which in church governance says that governance should be done at the local level as much as possible. I think this follows that revelation of Christ, both in the Old and the New Testament, wanting to use the local level as much as possible for the continuation of his mission. It speaks to us about the importance of our community here at St. Mary's. Us as a community is so important that we continue on that mission of handing and teaching the sacred deposit of faith that has been handed on to us. I had an experience when I was young that helped me to really appreciate the local church. When I was a kid, I would watch EWTN and I'd see some famous and well-known, worldwide, well-known priests giving various presentations on the things that they're experts in. And I remember thinking, wow, these priests I see on TV, these guys are really great. They know their stuff. They're really intelligent about this one subject. They have this great presentation. They're very funny. They're charismatic, all that stuff. And I remember as a kid thinking, well, why can't my local church be like that? Like I was always a little bit disappointed sometimes by the local priests. When I went here to Millersville, I was a student. I was going to confession, and it hit me one time when the priest that I was going to confession to on a regular basis would just simply repeat the same thing every single time I was there, no matter what it was that I confessed. It got to the point that I memorized his spiel. One time I even said it back to him, and he was not happy about that, but I knew what he was going to say. Every time I would go to confession, it would be the same thing. He would go, okay, for your penance, say to our fathers 3 Hail Marys, say the act of contrition, now tell God you're sorry. Every time. I realized over the course of my life that priest, whose name I don't even know, because I went to a different church, so it would be anonymous, whose name I don't even know, he had a greater impact on my life than any of those famous television priests. Because he was there to distribute the sacrament of reconciliation when I needed it, especially when I needed it the most. I came to him, especially when I was hurting or going through a difficult time. I came to him, especially when I was discerning the possibility of seminary, and talked with him. That priest, whose name to this day I don't know, he had a great impact on my life because he was there on the local level. I think there are special graces that are available on the local level that we're not even aware of, but that's because this is the way God designed the church. I think that it helps us to understand the importance of St. Mary's in particular, and this is one of the reasons why we're doing the tithing campaign at the moment. Now, I was supposed to preach on this last week, but unfortunately I had bronchitis and I lost my voice, so wasn't able really to mention it. But one of the reasons I wanted to do this tithing campaign at the beginning of this year was as a reminder for all of us, because, we had a big shakeup during COVID. It was like a big mixing table. Everybody kind of moved around and stuff. I'm one of those. I came here during COVID. So I thought this would be a good reminder of how unique St. Mary's is in our tithing efforts. Long time ago, we made the idea that we would become a tithing parish, that we would lead by example. And so St. Mary's gives 10% of what we receive in our donations to various charitable organizations. You can see a list of those in the bulletin, as well as in the bulletin board in the back, in the vestibule there. You can see the letters that we get back from all of the various people that we have helped through our tithing. I think that's such a wonderful example, that we lead by example, encouraging our parishioners to fulfill that obligation of tithing themselves. It is a trusting in the Lord. You know that we don't do at St. Mary's various second collections where somebody comes up from the local community and asks for something, but instead they go to the tithing committee and they ask for a certain percentage there. And I think this is a wonderful tradition. It's something that I had to learn when I got here because I never saw that before, but I think that's a great idea. Now, there are some second collections because the diocese mandates those, but for the most part, when people come to us for their missions trips, for instance, we have a number of our young people who do net ministries here. When they come to us for that, instead of doing pulpit announcements every weekend, instead we go through that tithing committee. And it's just a beautiful way of supporting these various missions in the church. Well, today and during this week, I hope that we reflect on that importance of the local community and the importance of tithing and the importance of giving. And we realize that what our Lord has done is a new teaching with authority. He has handed on that teaching to us right here in Lancaster to continue giving his message to the people that need it most, our neighbors, our community in Lancaster.